Yes, no.
With regard to the, the first unit I'm going to look at.
Right.
So let's start with this. Give me 1 second.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay, so let's start with the first unit. So what we're going to do today is obviously look at covering and starting off the first unit, which is how businesses operate. So I've got a couple of things open on my screen, which I'm going to just quickly minimize so that we have a bit of a clarity.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
So here we go. Now, this is the first unit in your course that we are looking at covering, and this unit will actually, make you aware of a certain amount of things that we normally would encounter when we talk about a business or an organization. When we look at the in the first learning outcome, in particular, we're going to learn how to understand the different types of organizations. And these different types of organizations are going to be based on the ownership. Right? Now, we know there are organizations in private and public sectors. So obviously, when you look at why do we group them as these organizations in these sectors, you look at charities, you look at non-government organizations, you look at certain congos, you look at private and public sector organizations. So what we want to be able to do is understand this classification, which is based on the ownership type. The second thing that we're going to look at today would be to understand the different type of structures which we get to see within businesses. So when I say structures, what I mean by structures is that what makes it up, yes. And when you look at a number of people working or employees or staff working within an organization, what kind of a hierarchical structure, flat structure, matrix structure, functional structure does the organization kind of work on? So how are they organized in terms of if you have a problem, if you need to speak to somebody, if there's how do you go, where do you go, and what makes the structure? The third thing that we're going to look at is also understand, how do we look at the organizations from a point of view of their local, national, and global economic environment. So when we say you're a small business which basically does trading in Manchester, for example, how are you affected by this policy which are happening at the local level? Immediate changes or policy changes which the government announces at the national level. Things like we are leaving the EU now, so obviously how does Brexit affect you as a business? And then to a certain extent, we also understand what are global economic changes. So global economic changes would mean that if the forex exchange or foreign exchange is to change, our currency change, and if in general something is to happen, say for example, if a war breaks out in certain regions, how does it affect the oil prices? And if these oil prices get affected, then how does it affect the business and trading in the UK? And how are you as a business affected? So some of these things is what we need to understand in the first learning outcome. Now, what we're also going to do in the extension activities, which is the merit and distinction activity, we're going to be looking at very clearly understanding how businesses look at defining objectives when we talk about vision and mission statements, and how do they differ from different organizations. So when I say, and you get to hear, when we see the adverts on the TV that every little helps, or always saving you money. Now, these are taglines which businesses have created. Can you recall in terms of always saving you prices or, every little helps? Who are these taglines for and which businesses they belong to? Any idea?
Could you repeat the question, boss? I might understood half of it.
I'm saying, say for example, when you look at the company's vision or mission statement, they kind of tend to define the objectives of the organization. So can you recall or remember seeing these adverts which have these, taglines or statements to say, always help, always saving you prices, or every little helps. Which businesses do you think these taglines or, are being?
This applies on businesses like Tesco's and ASDA and Aldi.
Very correct. So when I say every little helps, that's a tagline or the vision statement for, mission statement for Tesco's. So they always advertise, and when they advertise, and towards the end, when the jingle comes, it always says every little helps.
Yeah.
And then the other one is for ASDA, because they say always saving you on prices, or always low on prices. That is their, tagline or mission statement. So you understand how do businesses, create these statements differ, and obviously
Slogans.
Right. Yeah, slogans, taglines, slogans, how do they differ from one organization to the other? And then what we want to do in the distinction activity is to primarily understand how does, we have to take up a particular example of a country and of a business, and see how does the current national and global environment, or basically generally the atmosphere, is going to affect the business. And that is what we are going to look at studying in the first learning outcome.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
That's
good. So let's look at the first bit, which is to look at understanding the ownership of different types of organizations. So if I just bring out a quick presentation here, just to look at explaining before we could go into the different types of ownership. So what I want to do is understand what are the key ownerships when we look at different types of organizations. Now, sometimes when you look at businesses, you qualify them, or separate them on the basis of the primary, secondary, and tertiary activity they do. So primary activity could be a business which is looking at or somebody who's in that business is actually looking at producing something. So primary businesses tend to be manufacturing companies, production companies, which actually use the raw materials to be able to produce some sort of a finished good. Now, if I look at a steel plant, what will happen is, in a steel plant, you will see that they will use the iron ore which is mined from the earth. They will purify it, and to a certain extent produce raw steel or iron, which is then sold to very different many companies, distributors and things. Now, the secondary activity in that would be somebody who buys raw iron ore or steel from a company, then actually use that as a raw material to process it into things like ingots, or girders, or make into doors and windows and frames. So they would be looking at secondary activity, because they've taken the raw material from the iron ore plant or the steel manufacturing company, and then used it to further process it or assemble it into some sort of a finished or a semi-finished product. Right. And the tertiary activity will be that in this case, the business which is now maybe the business which has produced the steel furniture, or some sort of a product, is now selling it to end customers through retailers or a distribution channel. So the companies which are looking at retailing those products to customers and physically selling those goods rather than producing those goods, they are in the process of providing some sort of a tertiary service. That means they are basically providing fulfillment. And in this case, what you will generally see that these kind of businesses would be classified as tertiary businesses.
Tertiary.
So if I look at a basic segmentation or type of classification for businesses, what you will generally see is that we have public sector and we have private sector.
Yeah.
Now, on the basis of ownership, when we segment them, we are going to look at public sector and private sector. So public sector would be businesses which are owned by the government, or are semi-controlled by the government, or are bodies under control of the government. Private sector would be the businesses or organizations which are primarily owned by individuals, and they are in the main business of making profits by selling goods and services, right? Yeah. So sometimes we hear of concepts like nationalization and privatization. So a lot of we saw under Margaret Thatcher, an era wherein a lot of mass privatization happened for a lot of industries, things like railways, infrastructure, electricity, water. A lot of these things became privately held, and the government, as a strategic thing, divested their control in some of these franchises or industries, and they privatized it because they wanted the private sector to pick up and create jobs, pick up take the lead in terms of producing these goods and services, and in turn create jobs and create competitiveness in the economy. So that drove privatization. But sometimes in the recent election, we heard Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour manifesto which they put forward was they wanted to nationalize rail, water companies, electric companies, and they were looking at bringing it back under the control of the government from the private sectors. Things like broadband, they wanted to look at, obviously it's not happened, but that kind of a thing, if it was supposed to happen, that would have brought, reversal to privatization, and that would be called nationalization. That means the government will take control or stake in those enterprises or in those organizations, whereby they will be pretty much semi or fully controlled by government organizations and directly or indirectly by the government, and that process will be called nationalization. Now, when we look at ownership of companies, we look at ownership of companies and we look at ownership in the private and public sector, and those are the various types that we look at. So under private sector, we find when we look at companies, they could be classified as, or businesses could be classified as sole traders, partnership companies, franchises, cooperatives. When we talk about public sector, they could be classed as public corporations, companies which have government shareholding. So if you look at the recent financial crisis which happened in 2008, some of the banks were nationalized. So when you look at the Royal Bank of Scotland, when you look at that, RBS in particular, that bank is part nationalized. It has government holding in terms of its shares, and government is the largest stakeholder or shareholder in the company. So it has governmental shareholding. Now, what are Congos? Congos are semi-government organizations which basically enforce policy making at the national level, and this policy making at the national level is enforced using organizations which are semi-autonomous. That means they are run as government. They are run as organizations which basically would work within the private and public sector, but they have semi-autonomous control from a government perspective because of the implementation of policies they do. An example of this organization would be Ofcom. Ofgen. These are price regulators which basically regulate the price of water, electricity, when you look at commercial advertising on TV. So government organizations which have basically called, they implement government legislation policy around a particular sector, and they are semi-controlled by the government, and that's why they are called Congos. And then you have other government organizations. When you look at, can you think of examples of other government organizations?
Like FBI, police, federal.
Absolutely correct. So when you look at organizations like police, you look at armed forces, you look at fire, army, and those kinds of things. Yeah, that's correct. So those are going to be other organizations. Now, when we look at ownership and we categorize the businesses in terms of their ownership, we look at some of the key points that we want to look at. Why do you think businesses would be private? So, or individuals would have ownership of those businesses because they are looking at making profit. The second thing that we will look at is that sometimes when government looks at privatization or lets the market forces take over, is because they want certain things to happen. One, if you look at the example of Flybe from day before yesterday, the Flybe has been bailed out by the government because what they've said is it's the largest regional eco budget friendly line operator, and what they want to look at is they want that airline to survive. So government has agreed some sort of a rescue package, but in general, when we look at privatization and we look at private businesses, the government looks at promoting the concept of survival of the fittest. That means in some cases they want businesses which are profitable, are able to create jobs and also provide services, should actually survive. The second objective of that would be, yes, if you're running a business or you're providing some sort of a service, you should be able to make profits and most private businesses or private organizations would look at this as a major activity, which is to maximize profits they make from doing any such activity. And then when we look at businesses, how they go from being small to big, to medium to big and larger businesses is by increasing, their sales. And this could be done in the form of increasing either production in terms of revenue, in production in terms of units or numbers that they produce. If you look at a car manufacturing plant like Nissan, if they produce 200 cars a day, if they take their capacity to 220 or 250 cars, that would affect the overall cars they're producing in a month, and that could increase the number of units they are producing or cars they are producing, and that in turn will lead to increase in revenue, for the organization. And that would also mean that they are selling more of these cars, that the models are quite popular, and because of popularity, there is a demand for these cars and models in the market. Now, when we look at some of the other objectives, businesses, when they are local, that means they are small. You're based in Manchester, but when you start to grow your operations, you become big. You're looking to expand, and when you're looking to expand, you're looking at other reasons of growth. That means you want to increase your business, increase your revenue, your staff, your turnover, your profits, and that could be possible when you look at expanding or look at expansion. Now, not all businesses would look at expansion, and if they look at expansion, they would not look at for profits. But sometimes when the scale of operations of businesses, increase, like for charity, when you look at Oxfam, they might end up adding another country in terms of operations. Now, their aim of adding another country or operation is not to increase profits or make the bigger business bigger. Their aim is to provide more of their charitable services or services to the humankind, that they do things like poverty alleviation, providing clean drinking water. They want to give access to these basic amenities to more population in a particular region. Wow. And sometimes you look at even environmental friendly reasons. When you're environmental friendly reasons, they could also be reasons why businesses will expand. So, for example, you look at a business might transition from producing a particular type of product to producing a different type of product, and that would be more environmentally friendly, and that could also be one of the reasons why businesses want to, expand. Now, what I want to do now is look at with this understanding. Let's look at how do you classify different types of, businesses on the basis of ownership, and let's look at ownership from a point of view of just the private sector first. Now, this is a table which kind of highlights, and this is directly related to your activity that you're going to do in the assignment brief, which is activity 1.1. So I've got this Word document which I'm going to email over to you, and there is this document which is pre-filled, but there's a second part of the document which is page 2 is empty. So what we want to be able to do is, this is what we've studied. We want to look at understanding, what would be the ownership of different types of businesses and how do we describe them for a particular country. Now, this part of ownership that I've looked at here at this moment is primarily, in the UK, and some part of this ownership structure, if you look at, is also prevalent across other countries and other geographical locations. So when you talk about sole trader means sole trader. Go on.
Is it can you fill me in a bit?
Yeah, so the sole trader essentially is going to be somebody who is the owner of the business, is a single person or a single person run business, and this business, you are the owner, you are the worker, and you put in the money, you retain the profits. You're basically, you do everything.
Right, It's independent and dependent businesses type, individuals running it and more than one person running it.
Correct. So you look at sole trader, the number of owners in this case would be 1. Yeah. If you have to start a business and you're starting it yourself, you say, okay, I want to start a shop. So basically you are the owner. You are going to bring in the profits. You're going to maybe invest your savings, and whatever you get out of it in terms of business by doing the sales or by setting it up and running it, whether you run it profitability or you run in losses, you are going to be responsible for the liability. So in this case, you have 100% ownership, you have 100% control, you are the owner of the business, and in terms of sources of finance, how do you invest? you're going to bring in your savings, your say for example, your own earnings to the business. And in some cases, if you have got good credibility and standing in the market, you might approach your bank and or approach, for example, certain organizations like Business Link or the Prince Trust, partnership to look at getting a loan, to secure a loan for your business.
Right.
And whatever you sell, whatever you make is your own profit. And an example of this would be that you are a person who works for yourself. And an example of this would be, say, a plumber or an electrician. Right. Now that person works, for himself. He's got the skills, and he's the one who's the whole sole owner. He makes the decisions, and at the end of the day, he decides, okay, I'll do 3 call-outs today or 4 call-outs. They set their own practice, and that's why they are sole traders, make decisions. Yeah. The second type is partnership. So when we look at partnership would mean that you have between 2 to 20 owners of the business. That means a number of people come together and they form some sort of a combined partnership. And in that partnership, they are able to run under a joint unlimited, liability. They are able to bring and pool their resources to run a business. Now you could see this under, working with accountants, solicitors. So what happens in the case of law is you would see a solicitor that if you are a group of friends and you want to come together and form a partnership, you handle immigration law, somebody is a specialist in public law, somebody is a specialist in commercial law, somebody is a specialist in, say for example, intellectual property. So what you do is you get together, you form a business, and that business wherein you have equal or you have some sort of rights which are dependent on the memorandum of articles that you create. That I'm the 20% owner, you're 10% owner, or you bring this much investment, or somebody else brings that much investment, and you define all this in the MOA or Memorandum of Understanding and Articles, and that would then, give you the ownership and a stake in that partnership. Now here, everybody chips in, so it can't be that you pay the office rent and I pay the expenses. Everybody chips in because the partnership is that
equal. Yeah.
That's right. So what's been defined, you all pay for it, and you all, at the end of the day, share the profits. So here, there's an agreement which is normally done, and that agreement is called the MOA, Memorandum of Articles, and that and then legally binds all the people within the business who are a partner. You might be a partner with 5% stake, 10% stake, 50% stake, 20% stake, but that is all defined in the MOA, Memorandum of Articles. Now, type of these businesses would be accountants, solicitors in particular. You look at anything which is formed because of partnership. You might own a few shops and your friend might own a few shops, and you decide that we need to merge businesses. So we have now a coverage for a particular area with 10 shops, but you run your own business, he runs his own business, but on some side, if you decide to get into a partnership, you will do an MOA to say this is the profit, this is the understanding, this is the share structure, and that's how you work together. Right. Then you look at, private limited company. So at some stage, when you look at limiting your liability, that means you want to separate the stake of the owner or the person who owns the company from the stake of your business. That means if the business is to make loss, the company or the debtors cannot come and claim your property or your house because you are the director of the company, but your liability is different from your personal liability, which is your own assets and your own say for example things. So in this case, when you form a private limited company, what you're looking at is you're going to limit your company with some shares, and those shares and the MOU which is done, and then registration of the company has to be done on Companies House in England and Wales. And when you do that, your liability becomes limited. That means you can only, if you take certain decisions and they go in against the company and it may lead to losses, the company cannot personally recover that liability from the individual. So you are detached from the company, you are a director of the company, but you have liability as a director, but not as an individual, and your own assets and other details remain protected. So here, a private limited company would be, where there could be more than 2 owners, the liability in terms of debt or other things which are related to company operations is limited. You could have control of the company by having shares. So depending on who has the maximum shareholding, will have more liability, because in this case, if, for example, a company makes £100 of profit,
Right.
you are 80% shareholder and somebody is 20% shareholder. So at the end of the year, when the company profits are distributed, dividends are done, you get 80% of it, and the other person who owns 20% of the share gets 20% of it. So when you look at liability, your share of liability is going to be higher because you have higher share or stakeholding in the company. Now, the advantage of having, I'd say, limited company would be that in this case, because you are separated as an entity, you have more opportunities to go out and raise finances from the market. It could be things wherein borrowing from the market becomes easier. So it could not just be your own savings loan or overdraft that you have, but you can actually take out a bank loan. You could look at doing giving out some shares of your company to shareholders, which will allow you to bring in capital. And last but not the least, you then are able to also, because you are a limited company, that means your liability is limited by the company. In this case, what tends to happen is that you are able to take out loans or get credit and other kind of facilities in terms of overdraft from the bank, and that allows you to raise money to increase the investment in the business or for expansion of the business.
Right.
Then there are other types, which is public limited company. Now, public limited companies again are on a larger scale, and they tend to be organizations. When we look at classification of organizations, we have small, medium businesses, we have micro. When I say you have small business, you have SMEs, and then you have large corporations or large companies. So when I look at small businesses, anything which is has a turnover of less than, say, 3.2 million pounds would be classified as a small business. Anything which has a turnover of 3.2 million to up to 6.5 million would be classed as small medium enterprise. Anything which has a turnover of more than 6.5 million and more than 250 employees would be classed as a public limited company or a large corporation. Now, why does it become public limited and instead of private limited? A private limited is when the shares of the company are held by a fewer number of people. So the shareholders do not have, let's put it this way, the shareholders are either the owners or people who are directors or who have stake within the company. But when you say public limited company, what that means is the shares of the company are owned by public in general. That means you and me as individuals can own share in a company. That could also mean that the company is listed on the stock exchange. So when we say public limited company, that means companies which are listed on stock exchanges. The general members of the public can have shareholding in that, and as a shareholder, you would receive dividends or you receive some yearly benefits by being a shareholder in the large public limited or a corporation. Examples of these would be Marks and Spencer. You look at Next, Barclays Bank. You look at companies which are primarily listed on the stock exchange, trading. And then these companies also have various ways to raise capital in the forms of equity, debentures, bonds, and because their requirement in terms of capital, number of people working within the company is large, their scale and operations become, huge. Larger, yes. So they tend to be that when they have to raise money or finances, they have obviously more instruments to be able to raise finances, which could be not just the the profits which the company makes or the bank overdraft which the company receives or the cash flows which the company can get bank loan for because they can show that they have this much of working capital, but also from a point of view of long-term raising of capital for the business or sources of finance for the business. And they tend to be things like they can go to the equity market, they can go to the shareholders to raise more shares, split the shares, raise more money. They can issue bonds and also look at long-term loans which can be offered by large financial institutions. So 10-year loan, 15-year loan for infrastructure, machinery, expansion, things like that. Now, there are companies which are called cooperatives. Now, cooperatives tend to be, can you think of something which is a cooperative?
What's the definition of cooperative?
So when you look at cooperative, cooperative would mean in some cases have you heard of the co-op?
Yes, yeah.
So when you look at, when you look at cooperative, basically here, these companies tend to be, have ownership wherein the business, employees and, let's say the owners are having some voluntary responsibility towards
Oh.
these businesses are run and managed by people who are providing the services. So that means people who are actually employees of the organization also are the owners of the organization. So when you look at John Lewis Partnership, when you look at Co-op Bank, here all the people or employees who are actually working within the organization are, owners of the organization as well. So they are managed. These organizations are managed by people who work within the organization and also are part owners of the organization. So in this case, when we look at cooperatives, the advantage is that they could be, when you look at John Lewis Partnership, John Lewis, JLP as it is called, this all employees in the organization, about 160,000 employees are all partners within the company. So workers and businesses, own joint ownership, and they have liability to the business, or have some sort of a liability in the business, and they share profits and they are involved in the decision making of the company. Now, when we look at government department and agencies, obviously here the ownership is with the government, the liability is with the government. So when I look at when the government decides to spend some money on NHS, for example, National Health Service, it has unlimited liability. They cannot let the NHS collapse. So if it needs more money, government has to pump more money in. You look at local councils, you look at, army, you look at any such public services like police, government has to put the money in to be able to ensure that these services. Now, last but not the least, when you look at charities, charities are organizations which are primarily run as non-profit organizations. So if I have to say that, if you have to look at defining what is a charity, are organizations which are set up as companies, but, they are basically set up for not making profits. Their main reason, for operation is actually not making profits. An organization set up to help provide and raise money
out of generosity,
services for people in need.
Out of generosity, yeah.
Correct. So they usually, are governed by the Charities Commission, and any charity in the UK has to be registered with the Charities House or Charities Commission in general, just like all companies have to be registered at Companies House. And these companies actually provide voluntarily service, in terms of for a specific, purpose.
Right.
Oxfam actually works, as an example, taking it up, it works with, it gets funding from the government. It also raises money from the members of the public by donate through the route of donations. It raises money from donors, from large corporations, but it also helps drive the agenda for the government. So the government actually sets the agenda, because when they look at funding which they receive from the government also has certain policy related things which the organization is required to, carry out. So say, for example, when we had the, devastating storm in Haiti, we did see that, Oxfam and charity, as a charity went out and obviously provided clean drinking water, rebuilding of the housing, to a certain extent, shelter and other things within that region. And that was all funded for by the government. They also raised money there, through funders, donors, corporations, things like that. But the main advantage there was that the charity, falls into, their main function actually falls into, providing a particular type of service, which is in this case helping them, to overcome disease and other things. Yes. Yeah. So when we look at task 1.1, we are going to be looking at covering this particular type. And what I would just send you this particular, worksheet. Yeah. You'll be able to complete that, and that would help you achieve task 1.1.
Right, wicked.
Now, in this presentation, I'm going to send across to you. This also explains the different types of, companies and organizations on the basis of ownership in the slides we've discussed. So you will need to go through this to make sure that you're aware of this, and then at some stage with this knowledge, complete this particular worksheet to achieve that particular task. Okay.
100%.
Now let's look at the second aspect of understanding, the different types of structures. So let's look at different types of structures. So when we talk about different types of structures within the business, what we are looking at is understanding, from a point of view of looking at how organizations are, structured from a point of view of, looking at workings. So here, an organizational structure would be a framework which will allow, the set of responsibilities to be divided amongst managers and employees and staff. And then there's a structure to which, or a network through which all these responsibilities actually work, so that they work as a coordinated fashion. Now, when we look at different types of structures, we can look at 4 basic types, and these 4 basic type of structures that we look at, if I just look at giving an example of if I just look at different types of structures, when we look at, let's go to images because we know what the structures are. But when we want to look at these 4 different types, there are 4 basic types, and they can then be also clubbed into different other types on the basis of, combining some of these structures. So say, for example, we want to look at the 4 different types of structures. And if I just pick out appropriate image, so here I have the okay, let's look at this one. So if I now we will come to a little chapter. So here
is there any software that would allow me to use these same tables?
Just flowchart. You make a flowchart in PowerPoint, and that would be fine. You can use image rather than draw them up, because this is very basic. That you don't need to draw them on your own. You can just use flowchart or a PowerPoint, and in that I'll tell you how to do it. Now, if you look at these basic types, so the first one that we look at is hierarchical. So when we look at hierarchical structure, as the name suggests, when I say hierarchical, that would mean that at some stage, there is some sort of a hierarchy. That means when you look at an organization, the CEO is at the top, then you have the C-level, which is Chief HR Officer, Financial Officer, Logistics Officer, CXO, Chief Marketing Officer. Underneath that, you have things like managers or vice presidents, and then you have the front-end staff, operational staff, and then you have people who serve the customers. So a hierarchical organization in this case would be an example of, say, Tesco. So when you look at Tesco head office, the CEO, you have the board reports, the CEO reports to the board. Under the CEO, you have different regional presidents, which could be handling operations of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, emerging markets. And then underneath that, you have different sets of people who will work within different departments, and they tend to be, hierarchy. That means you see people working at the front end, providing services. They report into the manager, manager reports into a general manager, the general manager reports into a vice president, and vice president reports into a CEO. So there is a hierarchy under which particular organization actually works. Then the second would be when we look at flat organizations. Now, flat organizations would be that the number of tiers in terms of hierarchy is less. That means a worker in the organization has access to the manager, and also manager has access to the CEO, the top boss. So flatter organizations tend to be organizations when we look at branch offices, or look at organizations smaller in structure and size in terms of employees, they generally tend to be flatter organizations. Now, when we look at matrix organization, now matrix organization in this case would be that you have a combination of, or before matrix, let me do functional. Now, let me show you a website, and you think of if there is anything that you can think from this particular organization. So when I go to say Microsoft's website, you see that the organization is actually, website of this organization is actually organized by the way of products and services it provides. So things like Office, Windows, Surface, Xbox, deals and support. So here, as you can see, the organization is actually organized on the basis of functional structure. That means if you want to look at Windows, whether it's Windows for desktop, laptops, servers, tablets, things like that, mobile phone, you will all go into Windows. So here, the company is looking at selling its products and services or going to market from a point of view of functional structure. Now, if I look at Hewlett-Packard, HP,
Right.
So this organization, this would be an organization which is, the structure of this company more on the basis of because what it does is, because I'm not saying Microsoft is not a global company or Apple is not a global company. If you look at Apple as well,
Right.
you generally see that they are organized on the basis of products.
China.
A phone, a tablet, an iWatch, and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So here they put functional structure in front so that if users have to reach that organization, go to the Mac section, whether you want to buy, change, upgrade, replace, need support.
Yeah.
Is within that particular section. Now, if I go to Hewlett, you would generally see that they are organized in the form of a matrix organization. So what they do is they have products and solutions, they have services, support, and with that they will have solutions which are primarily for end users, enterprise, and companies. So if you see, they would then kind of structure their go-to-market point of view of looking at the individual services they provide. Within services, they'll have individual departments or employees working within the organization. So when you look at, in general, a structure of the organization, you can make out a lot about how the organization functions, what kind of culture hierarchy would the organization have, and what kind of services, products, would the organization sell, and last but not the least, how they would work towards going to market. So the second part of the thing that we want to understand in the learning outcome one in how businesses operate is you want to understand the organizational structure and design. So there are different types, and they can be classified on the basis of work specialization, departmentalization, chain of control, span of control, centralized, decentralized way of working, and obviously formal structure. So when we look at these attributes and you look at these type of structures, you would be able to place very clearly Microsoft in what kind of structure.
Right.
Microsoft would be in what kind of structure?
Microsoft would it be departmentalization?
It could be departmentalization, yes, definitely, because they are basically firming themselves. Correct. But within departmentalization, it will be functional or product related, because they have classified their products. If you look at Apple, they have classified their products.
100%.
Right? When you look at span of control, what kind of organization do you think would have span of control?
Span of control.
Minimum number of people having maximum number of control or chain of command. So when you look at flat organizations here, the person who's the owner could also be the financial director, and he has the chain of control as far as finance is concerned.
Family businesses as like gold stars and stuff.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When you look at centralized and decentralized structure, here you would see the kind of organizations like HP, because they are broken down into North America operations or European operations, Middle Eastern operations, Asian global operations. So they look at go-to-market on the basis of centralized and decentralized structure. So the second part of your learning outcome that we want to look at primarily would be in task 1.2 is to look at explain the structure of the organization by picking up some examples and then giving reasons why they are structured in this way. So when I send you this particular handout in terms of the organizational structure, and when you look at it on Moodle, you should be able to accomplish this particular task.
Is this within the later tasks, after task 3 and stuff? Because I've done most of them.
Come again on that, Hannah.
When will I encounter this work? Is this later on during the tasks, or Is it?
Yeah, and these are things which are already up on Moodle. So if I just quickly open up Moodle, this is already up on Moodle. You have access to the Moodle in any case. But
Yeah.
the idea here would be to, once I've delivered learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2, the best thing would be to go ahead and do these tasks so that you are doing it side by side to complete that, because these are activity based things, so it's not much that you need to look at here. The idea would be to pick up some of these things that I'm telling you and then start doing those tasks on the assignments. So the presentation here, 3.1, which the presentation that we are going through today is here. So we're going to come to the first few slides in a second, but all the bits that we've covered so far is given here. And in the handouts, which I'm showing you, the structure of the firm, which is the different types of, type. This is obviously some handout that you can read.
Yeah. I've seen. Yeah.
And then the ownership task sheet is given here, which I showed you earlier. This is the task sheet that you need to complete. I'll send you the Word document. And then when we look at, the bits on, the different types of structure, this is the particular handout that I'm going to send you for you to read. Okay. Now, let's go to the third one that we want to look at, is to understand how local, national, and global environment impact a particular business. So when I go back into the presentation here, and if I go into some of the basic slides, what we want to do is, before I understand what is, how does a business get affected, what we want to be able to do is understand what is a business environment. Can you, without looking at the slide, can you tell me what do you think is, we know what is a business. It's an organization. But what I want to know is, what is a business environment? Can you think of what is a business environment?
Business environment. I've really not covered on that yet. Could you fill me in?
So here, in this case, when I say the business environment, what we want to be able to look at is
like the surroundings and the setup structures and the organizations around it and stuff like that.
Yeah. So what is the business environment? Would be things which are internal to the business or external to the business.
Okay, yeah. And I knew about the external. I didn't know about the internal.
I look at the internal things to the business, and when I look at the external things, so when we look at what we're looking at is primarily understanding that there are certain things which can affect the business from inside. There are certain things which can affect the business from outside. So we look at these that actually affect the business from inside outside would be constituting something called the business environment. So from my point of view, when we look at some of these things that I just share my screen with you, would be to understand, certainly the bits which, when factors or forces which can affect the business from inside and outside. So inside factors could be, if you have a small business, like you're running a grocery store and you have an employee leaving the organization, your business is directly affected. But this is an internal factor, which is staff, is because it is the staff has left only in your organization, so it is only affecting your organization, not in the operation in that area, because there they have their own staff. So this is an internal factor. Staff, for example, shortage of products or inventory is an internal factor. Now, when you look at external factor, it could be that if there is a mass protest which is happening outside on the street, or if something which has happened as an incident and the police has cordoned off the area, that means no customer or no members of the public are allowed to go into that area, which means all the shop in that area for a certain amount of time will not have any footfall or customers coming in. And this could be an external business factor which is affecting not just your business but affecting every other business or shop in that
environment.
Environment. So when we look at internal factors, we look at factors which are within your control and which can be brought into your control, because the owners have direct access to or ability to be able to mitigate those negative effects. An external environment would be things which could happen primarily because of something beyond your control. So in this case, we are looking at if the exchange rate is to change, if there's a lot of fluctuation in the, say for example, currency and you're exporting or importing a lot of goods to manufacture something, then that would mean that you're going to be affected, and that is not just you're affected, but others are going to be affected in the same business sector as well.
The surroundings.
So if you look at internal business environment, these could be things like physical factors, it could be things like human factors, which are staff, financial, marketing support, or if your broadband goes down, that is your broadband has gone down or internet connectivity has gone down, but that would not necessarily mean others have gone down. So when we look at external factors, that could be something which can affect not just your institution but other institutions or businesses, and they tend to be classified into what is called micro and macro business environment factors.
Oh yeah, we did this. Yeah, we did this last time a bit. We touched on it.
So micro would be that it impacts the operations of the company. That means if you are a supplier and there's a huge impact of pricing of the product, that means if the exchange rate changes and that fluctuation is, given rise to a change in the price of your product, and that would mean that your product would become more competitive as compared to somebody else who is already having the raw material, they procured it, and they have some supplies, so they would be a bit more competitive in the market as compared to some of the others for a while.
They'll be ahead in business and stuff.
Correct. So if you look at with Brexit, a lot of businesses stockpile a lot of raw material and products because they know if the deal with Europe was not reached, their business would be affected, and those businesses protected themselves for a couple of weeks, months, because they stockpile those products. But if you are not able to stockpile because of financial constraints and things like that, that means your business would have become uncompetitive as compared to some of the other competitors in the market, and that would have been micro business environment effect. Now, when we look at external macro, macro means big, so micro is small. Macro means that the impact on this, because of the changes in the business and economics climate, would be both positive and negative, and this is something which you cannot control. Your organization has no control on it. So if the policy is to change tomorrow, if the government changes the VAT from 20 to 22%, you do not have any control over it. And in this case, this is a macro change because this will not just affect your business, but it will affect a lot of other businesses with regards to this particular change. And that tends to be classified as a macro business environmental factor. And then they can be further classified into economic, social, political, technological, demographic, and natural. If it's easy to understand and look at some examples quickly. Now, if Labour had come to power instead of the Conservatives, they were looking at nationalizing a lot of things. That would have meant a lot of change, which would have happened because of which factor? Economic, social, political, technological, demographic, or natural?
What was that? Sorry,
If Labour had come to power and they started to nationalize a lot of these things in terms of services, what would that factor be classified as amongst these factors?
Would it be? It can't be natural environment. It can't be technological. Is it social and cultural business environment?
I think it will be political. Because if they were to look at a fundamental decision of from privatization to nationalization of businesses, that means the policy change. That means the regulation brought across by the government, and it's dictated by the political climate in the country. Political change. So when we look at these kind of changes being brought about, what we want to do is group them or categorize them into different types. They could be economic, they could be social, cultural, it could be political, technological, demographic, natural. If say, for example, we had the storm affecting Scotland day before yesterday, and the schools were local. The local councils and the administration closed a lot of schools because of 120-mile, wind, headwinds and things like that. Why they did that? And that was a thing which affected not just the local businesses, but the general people in that area, in Scotland in particular, because of the natural environment. So,
100%.
So you should be able to classify these factors into, different types of factors. Now, for the purposes of, looking at task 1.3, what I would ask you to do is pick up a particular factor and then a particular business. You have to pick up a named business. That means you pick up a business like a Tesco or a local grocery shop. And Nando's would do. and then describe how Nando's would be affected by local, national, or global economic environment factors.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've like more or less done that. Global. I've done it locally, globally, and there was another one that I've not sure I remember.
So locally, which is local to say Manchester,
Yeah.
nationally would be in the UK or England, and when you look at globally, that would be not just in the UK but UK and France or UK and Germany or some of the other countries, and that would become
Yes,
globally.
I've already done this. I've done it in the assignment.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Now, with regards to this, what we will do is with this first learning outcome, we are going to stop here in terms of our discussion, because what we've done is we've covered pretty much 1.1, 2, 3, 1M1, and also the current and global impact for a named country. Now, because I've taken a lot of example of Brexit and how it affects businesses. So example of how local businesses were stockpiling inventory or things which they were importing from mainland Europe because of the Brexit policy, and it wasn't very clear whether we'll kind of crash out without a deal or we'll go with a deal.
Yeah.
They had stockpiled a lot of businesses were affected, and they had basically stockpiled inventory, minimum disruption to their operations.
Wow.
So take the example of UK as a country. Take the example of Brexit as a change or an impact which was happening, and choose one business and then basically describe it, and that would help complete learning outcome 1. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, 100%. The business I chose is Nando's.
Yeah, and you can choose Nando's. That's not a problem. So any business that you feel comfortable with, you have research and you have data for, that should be okay. Fine.
Right.
So let me stop today's session here, and we're going to catch up in the second session, and we look at covering learning outcome 2 and learning outcome 3, because in learning outcome 2, what we want to do is understand just the key major accounting terms. So there's not much to look at, but here what we want to be able to see is to understand some key terms in accounting terminology, things like different types of financial statements like balance sheet, profit and loss, cash flows. We want to understand what is profit and loss. So we want to understand the key terminology primarily in learning outcome 2. Okay? And that is what we are going to do in the next session. So when is your next session planned with us?
Whenever you could, Mr. Singh, whenever you could.